So by the way,
Yes.
I went out and looked up the word framework, and in the dictionary, it's a structure for supporting or enclosing something else, especially a skeletal support used as the basis for something being constructed. That's definition one. Two, an external work platform, a scaffold. Three, a fundamental structure as for a written work. And I think that is pretty close to what my idea of a framework is.
First of all, let me introduce John as the presenter before we get too carried away. John Colby is one of the original developers in Access who pioneered use of classes, as I understand it, the history of it. And we've had two presentations. This one, excuse me, this one will be about using a framework in the Access environment. And I'm going to turn the time over to John in a second to let him do that. I just wanted to take a minute to remind you the Access roadmap. We still hope for some of those things like the SQL editor, the Monaco SQL editor to be out pretty soon, charting and so on. The Discord server is still in action. We had a chat earlier this week, 2 or 3 of us. I'd encourage you to join, visit. There's some interesting discussions, and we meet a couple of times a week for informal chats. And as I alluded to a few minutes ago, I'm still hoping that someone would be interested in doing this job. I will commit to editing the presentations for a few months after the transition, if that will sweeten the pot for somebody who wants to do it. But I'm firmly convinced that it's time to bring in younger, more ambitious, more energetic personalities into this. And in that light, I would like to see someone else take over by the end of the year.
And the nice part of all of that is that obviously does not include me. So younger, more ambitious, et cetera, et cetera.
Et cetera.
Can't do it from your cab, John.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
You can't do it from what do you call it? Is it, you call it a cab? The thing that you drive a truck? The
Yeah.
cabin
Yeah.
that you drive
Tractor.
with it.
I call it a tractor.
Okay.
Call the whole thing a tractor trailer.
Yeah.
Right. So you're in the tractor part. Okay.
So
I think of
I am in a tractor right now.
Yes, I know. I'm thinking of the inhabitable part where you can actually put a bed and you sit and drive and you watch telly. I think of that as the cab.
The cab, yeah.
We call that the cab.
You'd have to set up recording equipment and editing equipment and all that stuff. Yeah.
That was the reason I asked.
Oh, by the way.
So I'm going to stop sharing and let you take over, John.
Okay, before you do that.
Yes.
Is anybody hearing the engine of my tractor?
No.
Good. I'm wearing a headset that trucks use, and it's got noise cancellation. That's pretty darn good. So, okay, well then I'm going to take over. I'm going to click the share screen, and away we go. Okay, so this lecture is supposed to be about what is a framework and why would we use one in Access.
We're still not seeing
your screen share is loading. Oh, okay.
So we see your web page. Framework.
Okay, so framework. All right, good. And then code. Yes. Are you seeing code?
Yes.
All right. Good. I'm just going through a couple of things that I wanted to be able to use as props. Okay, so back to here. Someone asked, what is this framework? And we know what a framework, we all are familiar with these definitions. And basically, a framework is a structure for supporting or enclosing something else, especially a skeletal support used as the basis for something being constructed. So I used the example of Microsoft Windows or Linux or something like that. What is Windows? Windows is a whole bunch of code that starts in the beginning, starts loading pieces of itself into memory off the disk. So it first loads the BIOS, the drivers, it loads stuff that'll allow it to talk to the disk. It starts loading that allows it to draw onto the screen, the keyboard, the mouse, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when it's done, all that loading, all of a sudden it just stops. And then it's nowadays, it starts displaying advertisement for us. But that's not what I would use my framework for. So all of that said, why would we use that in Microsoft Access? For exactly the same reasons that you would use it in Windows. If I say I want to open Access, I've got something that I developed, this thing right here, and I click an icon down at the bottom, Windows goes, oh, I know how to load Access, and it goes and opens files on the disk, starts loading the file off the disk, it starts drawing windows, it sets the mouse up, it sets the keyboard up, and after a few seconds, my application is sitting there ready to be used. It's not doing anything. It's just sitting there ready for the user to click on a button or click into a control and start typing something, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So Microsoft Access is a framework. It's a database framework. It allows us developers to use its pieces and parts to design forms, design queries, and so forth and so on. So what you're seeing is that you have a framework sitting on top of a framework, sitting on top of a framework. Access is a framework for creating database applications. It sits on top of Windows, which is a framework for controlling your computer and allowing other things on top of it to function. So why would I create another level of abstraction, a framework on top of Access? And the answer to that is because I want to do stuff exactly the same way over and over again from application to application. Now, if you think about it, that's exactly why you use Windows, because you want the mouse to work exactly the same way whether you're talking about the browser or Microsoft Access or a game that you're playing. The mouse needs to work the same way. So I'm going to develop a database. And when I click something, I want my database. This is something that I decided, no, I wanted to do this thing. When I click into or tab through controls, I want the control that has the focus to change the background color. Everywhere. If I form open and I click into a control, that control better change the background color. Why do I want that? Because that allows the user to very quickly learn that, hey, that blue thing right there, that's got to be where the insertion pointer is in this form. And when he opens the next form, the first thing that gets the control, hey, oh, that's where the insertion pointer is. Because as we all know, the insertion pointer in text boxes and combo boxes can be damned hard to find in our applications. So I want my application to change the background color. How do I do that in every single place in my database? It's actually quite easy with classes. But just like Windows, I start my application when you open my application goes, okay, I have to load the framework before I do anything else. I got to get the framework to load. And it goes out and it calls a function in my framework that says, okay, load this class and this class and class and this class and get all that stuff ready to rock and roll. And then when it's done, it probably will open your first form. And when that form opens, it already has all of that framework stuff sitting loaded, ready to go, so that when the form itself loads, so I've got a class form, and in every one of my forms in the code behind form, the very first thing that happens is it checks to see if the framework's loaded. If the framework isn't loaded, it loads the framework. And once it does that, then it says, oh, there's the class form, CLS form, now loads CLS form. And CLS form loads. And CLS form goes, oh, I have to load classes for text boxes, combo boxes, all tabs, controls, all this stuff. I have to get all that stuff loaded because that stuff is only useful in the context of a form, and this is the first time a form has loaded. So the very first thing the form does is say, hey, load class form. Class form goes, oh, okay, iterate through all the controls in the controls collection of the form, and if there's a text box, load a CLS text for that specific text box and save a pointer in a collection. Now, what's the next control that I found? Oh, I have a radio button. Okay, load a CLS button and store it in a collection. Why am I doing that? Because when I load that text box class, I pass in a pointer, and I hope we don't get into conversation again, whether it's a pointer or a reference or all that nonsense, but I'm passing in a pointer to the particular control that I'm dealing with right now. I'm iterating through the controls collection, and inside the controls collection is a pointer to every single control on the form. And as I go through them, assuming that I even want to deal with that type of control, and I don't always, but mostly I do. So if it's a text control, I say, okay, go grab an instance of the CLS text, pass in a pointer to this specific text box that I'm working with right now, to that class instance of CLS text box, and save a pointer in a collection up in the header of CLS form. That text box now has all the code that it's expecting to use loaded and ready to rock and roll. And if it happens to be clicked in, if an event fires in that thing saying got focus, the event in that instance of that class will cause the background of that text box to change colors for me. And voila, I have now allowed every single form to know how to load classes for every single control, and those classes have default behaviors that I, the developer, want it to have. That is why you would use a framework in Access. And I'm not seeing any people moving around. Are people there?
Yeah, but I think we've already covered all this part before.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
We're really, I guess, interested in how you turn those classes and put them out to a library and manage that.
Okay. Okay, so that was what this was all about. So when you export a class or a module or the code behind form, it gets stuck out into a CLS text box, and the only thing you then have to do is change this to true, the creatable to true, and the exposed to true, save it, and load it back into your library. Why do you do that? You do that because those two things allow classes to be seen from code outside of the library. Until you do that, classes cannot be seen from code outside of the library.
So you're exporting this to a text file from your main application, changing those, and then importing it into a separate AccDB that's your library.
Yes, or I developed the class in the library. A lot of times I'm working directly in my library because I got to get it working. So I'll have a demo form inside my library. I'll have a table of stuff inside my library and so forth. And I will get stuff working inside the library. And if I were to reference that library from an application, you wouldn't be able to even see that it exists, these classes. If you tried to call them, it would just error. By changing these things, these two, exposed and creatable to true, saving it back out into the text file, and then importing that text file back into your library, overwriting what you exported out initially. These two things are now set to true. And if you export them back out again, if you deleted that text file and exported that class back out again, these things would still be set to true. Okay, so in order to use classes outside of your library, which we want to be able to do, if I've got a form and I'm going to reference, hang on a second, I've got C2DB Framework 3G and C2DB Lightweight Security, LWS. These two things are frameworks. This framework is a lightweight security framework that I developed, and C2DB Framework 3G is a framework with all of that kind of stuff that I was talking about previously inside of it. Originally, lightweight security, I developed lightweight security inside of Framework 3G, but I realized that there were going to be cases where the lightweight security framework would be useful without being tied into my Framework 3G.
Can I interrupt for a second? Because I'm
sure.
I think I confused myself a little bit here. So the framework that we're looking at here, this is actually an AccDB, which is your library. That's the file that holds the library. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, if you go into references, let's go. Yeah, here's lightweight security. That's this guy right here. It's not referenced by this framework. Okay, if I were to click that, then this framework would be able to see the stuff lightweight security, but I don't need that from inside this framework.
But you would see it, you do that from a separate AccDB in order to use it.
That's correct. These are
now I'm tracking you again. I'm sorry. Thanks.
If we come back over to here, this Bernhardt, hang on a second. If I come into this guy and I do the same thing, here you can see I have referenced both the lightweight security framework and the framework 3G. This thing is all of the stuff for my application. This thing is all the stuff for my framework that handles forms, text boxes, etc., record sets, etc., etc. This thing is a framework that handles lightweight security. I developed a system. Lightweight security is a system that allows me to use table-driven programming to set up visible and enabled properties of forms and controls in my application. In other words, if I decided, hey, I want to be able to use the same form for the people that are just sitting here entering data, and that same form be able to use the controller of the company, but they have different functions, and the controller of the company is able to open forms that control payroll. Well, the guy entering data for a insurance claim has no business whatsoever seeing a payroll for the people inside the company, but the controller does. So inside of my application, when a form opens, it says, okay, who's allowed to open this form and who is currently logged in? Oh, a user is currently logged in and they're attempting to open a form that only sales is allowed to see. And basically it opens, never even becomes visible, and displays a message if I wanted to that says you're not allowed to see this, and shuts right back again. Or the form might open and there might be a payroll and a length of employment control on that form and a whole bunch of other stuff. And people over here in this department can see everything except the length of employment and the pay amount. And they're not in the group that when that form opens, those particular text boxes, as they attempt to load, they go, hey, is the current user in a group that's allowed to see this control? Yes or no? If it's no, it never becomes visible. That whole entire control just never becomes visible. You set your cursor into it or anything like that. So that was my lightweight security framework, and it's fully developed. I actually used it as described above, but it was something that I discovered I could carve out and use if the client wanted this lightweight security functionality, and if they didn't, I didn't want it in my main framework. So I just carved all that functionality out, put it in its own little thing, and then I can reference it in an application if I need that functionality, or not reference it if it's an application that doesn't need that functionality. Questions?
I have a question,
No.
John. Is it
Sure.
possible to have, Tom corrected me on my terminology, two different instances of a class, and you assign one in a particular case or the other in another case, as opposed to just having one that is for all the text boxes, let's say. Let's say some of my text boxes, I want to have one kind of behavior and some a different kind of behavior. Is that possible to do?
Yes.
Okay.
There are a lot of different ways to skin that cat. One way is naming conventions. So you can have, like, I have a naming convention, Rexcel, RECSEL, and when a combo box loads, that code that goes through the controls collection looks for a combo box, and when it sees the combo box, it says, what are the first few characters of this combo box? And if it's this, load this class. If it's this, load this class.
Okay, okay. So my other question, and it's probably no, can you have a basic class for all your controls? And then,
No,
okay,
no. And the reason is there's inheritance does not exist in Access. Inheritance doesn't exist. You're talking about something where you have a base class. This is, and you inherit the functionality of the base class and add new code on it for this branch of the class and different code on it for this other branch of the class. That's inheritance, and VBA does not have inheritance.
okay,
We
yes,
get
that's
that.
my question.
We get around that by wrapping code with other code. So I'll have a class that wraps a text box as an example. You can't inherit the functionality of the text box. You just can't do that. You can't call up the chain and say, hey, I know that you can do this thing for me, so do this thing for me. Not allowed. But what I can do is say, hey, pass in a pointer to that text box, store it up in the header of my class, and now sync all the events, or this event, this event, this event for that text box. And so I have a CLS text box class that wraps the text control in more code. And it kind of sort of looks like inheritance, but it's not. But with naming conventions now, you can say, hey, I've got combo boxes. This combo box is going to be a rec selector. There's functionality for a record selector that is pretty specific to finding a particular record in a form. The form opens and finding the record that the combo box currently points to. And if you click on the combo box and move to a different one, it says, oh, I've just moved to a different record. Now, hey, form, because I also passed the form into this thing. Hey, form, move to the record with this this ID. So that's functionality that is only useful in my CBO rec cell. And so I have a CBO rec cell literally called that on my form. And as I go through it, I see, oh, this is a combo. There's a control type property. This is a combo box. What is the name of this box? Select case CBO rec cell, load this class. It's not CBO rec cell, it's something else, load some other class. That's the way I got around it. Now, that was 25 years ago, so we might have it. That was not particularly wise way to do things, but that's the way I handled it. So
it would be great to see an example of that sometime, John.
Oh, sure. Let me okay, so this is the code for this form. This is the code for this form. So up in the header of this thing, I've got a class form. I've got a class map it. And this class map it is a class that handles all of this stuff right over here. Because all of this stuff is a system that allows me to do things that really have nothing to do with data entry and in the main form. So I built a little class called class map it, and we will actually load this thing. I'm going to warn you, this stuff is going to get pretty deep pretty quick, but we'll go ahead and go into design view here and load it. Okay, so what happens? Well, we all know form open happens. And when form open happens, I say set F class form, this guy right here, equal to a new instance of D class form. And hang on a second. I'm hoping my Okay, so what happens when D-class form, see D-class form here? We just dropped into D-class form, and D-class form initialize event is now running. I have to apologize. I'm having to actually hold down the function key to cause the step function. Okay, so what happens right here? This is that framework init code that I was telling you about. Hey, let's check and see if the framework is initialized. Now, we can drop into each one of these things, but it's going to go right over your head, and you're going to just get lost. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is show you, here's where I initialize my framework. If it's already initialized, when it drops into here, it's going to go, hey, we've already loaded this thing. Don't load it again. Okay. So that's that. This thing is just a debugger thingy that allows me to put stuff down on the bottom. And then down here, I start, if I can this, Shift F2. Ah, damn it. So I'm going to set up a class global interface, a collection for my classes, a collection for sysvars, a collection for tabs, et cetera, just things I found useful for my ideas 25 years ago. And Shift F8. And so I set all that stuff up. I start a timer because I found it useful to be able to time how long it takes to load records in a form. Back in the day, I actually used this to set up a call center software for disability insurance specialists, and they liked a metaphor of a big form with a big tab with individual tabs for policy, company, insured, insurer, all that nonsense. So they had all these tabs. On each tab, there was a subform. On each subform, there might be tabs, et cetera, et cetera. And I quickly created a just-in-time subform because of that very thing. If you load all of that stuff all at once, it would take 5 minutes, particularly back in the day. You were talking 2004 back then. And you tried to load that whole thing, it would take 20 minutes to load the form. But what I quickly realized is, hey, they haven't even clicked on the insured tab. They can't see it. So why would I load it? But if they do click on that tab to see the insured, the person that's filing the claim, the claimant, if they click on that tab, then I'm going to load a window or a subform that pulls that particular set of information out and displays it for that person. So they had this big old form with all these tabs across the top, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're doing. So what I did was I set up a timer so that I could see how long it takes to load this piece and that piece and the other piece, and find out why it was taking 25 minutes to load my form. Okay, so Shift F8. And we come back out again, right? I mean, that was just setting up D-class form. Now we're going to go in and we're going to initialize this. Hang on a second. Damn it. I think it's function F8. Okay, so once you come into the init for this class, it's going to pass in a pointer to the form and a cancel and so forth. And it's going to come down here and it's going to start initializing pieces of stuff that the form is going to need. Eventually, and this is what you were, I think, specifically looking for, we're going to hit function F8. Oh man, I didn't want to do that. Yeah. We'll
I
be
think
back in
it's
a minute.
Control Shift F8 to pop up a level.
Well, it is, but normally I have it set in my BIOS so that I just hit F8, and now I'm not able to do that. So function. Okay. Can somebody tell me how to just run to this point?
You know, you have a toolbar up there. Those buttons might be more convenient than the shortcut keys.
Well, might be, but I don't develop on a day-to-day basis anymore. I drive a truck, so all I'm saying is.
So you should be able to right click and say run to cursor.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Run to cursor, and then function F9. I'll get rid of that. Okay, so I have an OpenArgs class. My OpenArgs class is a collection of stuff out of a table that allows me to say, hey, do I want my tabs to have just-in-time subforms or not? And I can set a OpenArg that says yes or no, and I can then say inside my application, modify it from yes, so that it's in general, it's open just in time. But in this particular application, I don't want just in time because I don't do very deep subforms or something like that. So that's what my OpenArgs are for. And we will run the cursor and step into here. Oh man. Oh, because I already did it. I already ran this. Okay, well, hang on just a second. To go down in is Shift F8 or F8?
F8 if you want to go step by step. Shift F8 if you want to skip over and just execute the lines in where you are.
Yeah.
But I thought I saw you try to set next statement on the 2 lines down. Did that not work?
Well, I wanted to run into the find controls. This is where going to see me loading CLS text boxes, CLS combo boxes.
That's F8, John.
Yes, what?
That's F8 on its own will take you into. So the difference is F8 is step into and Shift F8 is step over.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then the problem is I'm having to use the function key with the F8. There we go.
Well, you've got the buttons up the top to the right side of the middle where you've got the design one. Yes. You've got the right arrow thing. That's run to run.
Yeah.
And then you've got
I think you don't understand.
The hand and then the step into and the step over.
I've got on my screen, I've got a big black bar right over the top of a bunch of that stuff that says a participant has enabled closed captioning.
What?
You can see this transcript.
Oh, you know what, John?
But you can
That's happened to me. You can drag it by the top of it and move it.
So
okay.
Yeah.
You should be able to just say okay.
Yeah.
It's an okay at the right hand side.
Yeah.
But you're saying that the using function keys is interfering with your use of function keys, John.
See the
BIOS.
He's on a laptop which has the F keys work in conjunction with a separate function key. You have to hold that down and hit the F keys to get the
John,
same.
Yes.
John, you can also make your code window shorter so it doesn't start where that black box is covering things if you can't get rid of the box.
Yeah. So what is this? Is something about closed captioning? Or
No, that's gone now.
okay.
But I'm just going to say that the last time I was in this database was a month ago when I was trying to add some functionality to that form that you were looking at out there. I don't develop on a day-to-day basis. I don't develop on a month-to-month basis. So I was hoping to have a whole. Yes,
well,
go ahead.
yeah, I think you are inside find controls now, though. Correct?
I am. Yes. Yes. Do we know how to get rid of this thing up here?
Are you talking about the object browser, John?
No, I'm good now. Okay, so this code, anybody who's done a control scanner, and I know a couple of you do a control scanner. This is it. For each control in inform.controls, the .controls is the control collection, and then with the control, you're looking for particular things. You're looking for control types. And down here, you say, oh, if it's a text box, then load this class. If it's a subform, load this class. If it's tab control, et cetera, et cetera. Combo box. Here's where you can see I actually did that. If the name equals combo rec cell, then load the D-class combo rec cell. Otherwise, load the D-class control combo. So that's where I actually used my naming convention to load a specific type if the combo is called this thing. Otherwise, load a different class. So
would that limit you to a single instance of a combo rec cell on a form? If it's looking for that specific name?
No, because what happens, well, it would.
And another question,
no.
Is this where you would do a wrapper to simulate inheritance?
I think he's still trying to answer the previous question, Crystal.
Yeah. So my question is.
So you can only have, George, you can only have a combo with a given name one time on a form.
That's what my question was. You're confirming that so you can only have so you can only have one combo box then that does the selection on a form.
That's correct.
Okay.
The record selection. Yes.
Yeah, you have to go in baby steps for me.
That's okay. I'm going to run back out to here, right? So this is combo rec cell. This is it right here. And if I go down here, I say, I want to go to that record. Well, we just went to that record. Now I can say, hey, I want to add this record to out. So I click it and it says, take all that information and put it over here. And now I want to go to this place. Okay. And add that. And now that I'm done, I want to click on that place right there. And I want to say map that particular address. And when I click it, with luck, it opens the maps and it loads a map for that specific location. And there it is right there. Okay. So that allows me to go, oh, okay, well, now I see where it is. And I just close this whole thing back down again. Now I'm going to map that whole entire route. Well, good luck with that because these places are I just picked some places at random. But we'll say, okay, take me to those 3 locations in that order. And with luck, oh, there we go. It says start here and go to there, and then go to here, and then go to there. So that mapping stuff is all of this stuff, and it's a framework for mapping, if you want to think of it that way. It's just a bunch of stuff that you have to have all of those buttons. If I wanted to say, hey, well, that's cool, but I want this thing to be my second location. Well, fine. Let's move it up to the second location. Now, when I map the whole thing again, I'm going to start here, go here next, and then go there. Oh, well, I want that to be the first place that I go to. Okay, well, let's move it up to there. So you get the understanding that all of these things work together and really have pretty much nothing to do with, all of this information over here. This information allows me as a driver or my boss as a boss to go, these are the places that we go. Put all this information in. I actually imported all this stuff out of a spreadsheet, which I got in deep doo-doo because somebody gave to me to begin with. But anyway, I imported all this stuff out of a spreadsheet, dumped it into this table, and now I can say, hey, I want to go to Henry Home and add it to my list of stops. And so now when I map it, it'll say, okay, we're going to go here first, here next, here next, here next. And then I bracket that with my home base location so that I start at Bernhardt Furniture. And from Bernhardt, I go to here, and then I go to here, and then I go to here, and then I go to here. And then I go back to Bernhardt Furniture. But I don't put Bernhardt Furniture in this thing. So that's a framework. Why would I do all that stuff? Because I needed to be able to draw myself a map and know where I was going. Why did I do all this stuff? Why did I do that? Because I wanted it to turn blue. Why did I do that? Because I wanted to be able to select the loves and add it to my map.
So in the external libraries, how are you loading data from the main application? Or is it all just being pulled from the controls as you load the class?
Well, the data, I use bound forms, first of all. Okay, so every control is bound to a field in the form record set. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking.
But you're not loading from the record set in the external library itself. You're getting all the data via.
No. The application references, about references. So hang on. Tools references. The application references my framework. The lightweight security, it can if it wants to. So it references the framework. The framework doesn't have a clue about data. It's not supposed to have a clue about data. It doesn't know anything about even what the application does. Because if it's generic code, it's like a mouse. Windows doesn't have a clue what the mouse is doing. It just knows that when you wave it around, if it goes over the top of this window, it changes and does this thing. If it goes over the top of this window, it changes and does something else. But in terms of what is the application back behind the mouse, Windows doesn't know or care. When a keyboard is clicked, Windows doesn't know where it's going or care. That's not its job. Windows' job is to talk to the keyboard, and when your application opens and you click a key, you're telling Windows, hey, I clicked the key, go get it and hand it back to me. And Windows goes, okay, here it is. So your framework doesn't know about the application's data. That said, the lightweight security kind of does, because all of a sudden with lightweight security, I had to know, hey, this form is able to be opened by people in this group and this group, but not in any other groups. And this control had to become visible for people in this group and this group. So again, it didn't really know about what the data was being displayed as much as it did are you a member of this group? And if so, are you allowed to see this control? Right?
Yeah. So how is it getting that data? Is it getting it via a form, or is it actually loading a record set?
The lightweight security data?
Yeah. So the external, lightweight library, how is it getting the permissions data?
Well, so Adrian says, hey, I wrote an application called XYZ, and in my application, I'm going to have engineers, scientists, and secretaries. And the secretaries can see these forms, and the engineers can see these forms, etc. So Adrian Bell goes, I know my application, and there are tables behind the lightweight security that says, what are all the forms? And what are all the controls in the forms? I actually developed forms that would scan through and find every user form, every application form. And again, I use naming conventions, USYS. I used USYS as, hey, this is my stuff. And if it didn't say USYS, that's application stuff. So I would say load all of the forms and load all of the controls off all the forms and have a control that would allow me to select a form. And when I selected a form, some person, Adrian Bell, had to go, I'm setting up the security for this thing. So I know that Ginger is a secretary and she's in this group. And this group can see this form. So when this form opens, see if whoever is currently using the database is in the group that's allowed to see this form. And Adrian Bell goes, okay, for this form, this group can see it and this group can see it. And now there's controls on that form. And of those controls, this group can see this control, but this group cannot see this control. It's manual labor. Somebody's got to figure that stuff out. And I did it, but mostly I turned it over to a high level inside the company because they know who's allowed to see this stuff,
Yeah, but that data is in a table that your lightweight security library has to interrogate.
Yes, but I load those tables into each application because the lightweight security framework.
How do you load that information into those?
How do I load the tables?
How do you load the data from those tables into the lightweight security library?
You load the skeleton table and everything that it does for you. Like there's a form table out in the lightweight security library. It doesn't have any data in. It's just a table. And it says, hey, I'm a form. I've got such things as the form name, and I've got a table called users, and I've got a table called groups, and I've got a table called controls, and I've got a table called form controls, and I've got all of those kinds of things, but they're just skeletons. They don't have any data in because the framework itself can be used for company A, and you sure as hell don't want their users in the database when you use that same framework for company B. They're empty. So what I do is when I say I'm going to use lightweight security for company A, I go out and I run that says grab all of these USYS tables and they're empty, pull them out of lightweight security into the current front end. And now Adrian is going to go out there and say, well, I've got a form, I've got controls, I've got users, I've got groups, I've got user groups, all that stuff. And you start setting it up. What are your groups? Who are your users? Which users are in which groups? which groups can open which forms, which groups see which controls. I mean, it's pretty darn labor intensive, but once you do that, you've got a system. Well, I called it lightweight security because you guys would be able to crack it, but my users couldn't.
Okay.
So did that answer your question? You don't have the data itself
Can I
in the library.
Can I ask the question in a different way? See if I understand it. So in the AccDB, which holds the lightweight security code, there are also tables, skeleton tables.
Yes.
Same one. So your code goes to that AccDB, copies them back into the host, and then from there they're set up into the front end.
Into the front end.
In the front end.
Yes.
And does that happen once, or does that happen every time you? How often does that?
Well, when you set up your security, there's a whole process for setting up the security for the front end. I mean, if you think about a lot of companies, we as developers will go into a company and we might just say, hey, I'm going to build a whole front end for accounting, and they've got their own front end. So the lightweight security in there pulls those empty tables into the accounting front end, and they're empty. And you go into the accounting front end and go, okay, well, who's the vice president of accounting? He can see anything. Who's these managers? Who's the people that do payroll, et cetera, and then you start fleshing out the data that goes in those tables. And when you're done, you've got a security system. It's pretty much just like Windows security system.
So when a user opens the form, it calls that lightweight a function in that lightweight security.
Yes.
And how does that function in the lightweight security library look up to see if that person has permissions?
Well, the people have to log into the database. There's a form that allows them to log in. And they select their user and they type in their password, and it goes, okay, well, you're in this group and you're in the group, and the same person might be in 3 different groups, and so they can see any of the forms that those 3 groups can see, and they can see any of the controls that those 3 groups can see.
And how do you control that? So there's the lightweight security library has a function that checks their permissions when they try to open a form.
Yes, when any form opens, the form says, I'm using lightweight security. What groups are allowed to view this form?
Okay, so how does that function then inquire into those usage tables to see if they have permission?
Well, the form goes, I know that there's a groups table, and I know that there's a users table, and I know that there's a many-to-many. This user is in this group and this group and this group. So it loads all that stuff. All that stuff is, once it's set up, all that stuff is part of the framework initialization. Just Windows.
Yes, but Windows, I'm talking about at runtime.
Right.
So
am I.
In the function, right, you're looking up to see what a person's group is and therefore what their permission is. How is that function accessing that table in the front-end application? So how's the library accessing the tables, the usage tables, in the application?
Because the code is running in the front end. It's not running out in the library. Executing code runs inside the front end, and the front end has access to whatever the front end has access to. So there are tables. There are tables in the front end, You pulled all those blank tables, empty tables into this front end and filled it out.
Yeah.
And now the code is running in the front end.
And those tables are physically in the front end.
That's correct.
So how do you prevent it from recreating that and overwriting those tables? Is there a way to check to see, okay, I've already got my configuration tables. Do I need, why, how do you prevent that from happening?
Well, you have to have code that basically initializes it the first time. You as the database developer are going to be setting up the security system, right? If it can go out on the floor, we already have to have users and groups and users in groups. That has to be done. So you as the security administrator, or whoever the security administrator is given the responsibility for finding a list of all of the groups, all of the users, and which users are in which groups. And that's the very first thing he does. He fills those tables out. So now when the database opens, just like Windows, when Windows opens, when the database opens, it goes, oh, I'm using lightweight security. I have to load groups. I have to load users. I have to load user groups. I have to load forms. I have to load form controls, et cetera, et cetera. And it preloads all the stuff into collections of all that data so that it's cached in memory.
Okay, so the data from the USIS tables that has all the permissions, and I think we all understand groups and what have you, gets loaded into collections in the class, in the library.
Right. So now when all that stuff gets done, at some point a screen pops up and goes, okay, Mr. User, who are you? And there's a combo box, and the user goes, I'm John White. And when I select John White, it says, okay, enter your password. And when you enter the password, it hashes the password and looks up the hash in that table and says, oh, that's the wrong password, buddy.
Yeah, okay. So can you show us the code that's loading that data into the collection?
Probably, but but that's I'm not prepared to do that right now. No.
Well, I thought that was part of the brief, was that you would be showing us how to load data into the classes.
Well, okay, sure. Yes, I can do that. I think.
So are you saying that because the code from the external library is being called from and running inside the base application, that it can use like an open record set on a table in that? You don't have to. All right.
You can get at stuff out in the library. That is possible. That's how you get the skeletons. Another way of doing that is to have code that runs that just builds the table on the fly using SQL.
Yeah, I'm not talking about building the table. I'm talking about getting data back out of it.
So the Framework 3G has sysvars. Okay. You've got a class sysvar that holds one system variable. Sysvars is a collection of however many sysvar individual items are in a sysvars table. Now let's go back over to this guy and go up to my tables. So here's a USIS table app sysvars. Okay, it's got two sysvars in there. One is the name of the developer and one is the developer's email. It could have more. It could have whatever I want in there. But the point is that this stuff, literally this exact data, exists in USys table app data sysvars out in the library. And when I pull this thing in, I pull in the structure and I populate it with the data from out there in the library. And boom, I've got these two records in there. I was hoping to have more sysvars.
Yeah, that's right. Two records is enough. I just want to see how it's done.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was, well, I'll wait, but I have another question.
Well, so just like Windows loading up, the problem with seeing exactly how it's done, you're loading data out of a table. You're opening a data as a record set. You know how to do that. Okay, go to the first record. Load the first record into USys class.
But how is it referencing how is the code in the library referencing the table in the parent application?
Because I tell it in the parent application, I'm going to have these sysvar tables with these names. And typically I have 3 different sysvar tables, at least 3. One sets up my framework. It says, what color do I want the back color to be for text boxes when it gets to, so what's that color going to be? That kind of information, okay? Another one says, okay, what's the data about the company? The company's address, the company's email, the name of the president, whatever they want, and is going to be on reports and stuff like that. That's a separate table. And then there's another one that I use for controlling stuff inside my current instance, like, am I going to use just-in-time tables or not? So I've got some of this stuff, like the information about the client, who the president is. Well, that's not something that is the same across the companies that I work for. So that table is not populated at all. Nothing in there. But the one that tells me what is the background color of a text box when it gets the focus, that table is populated. And so when I pull the table into the front end, I go back and say, hey, give me the data. And I pull all that data in and drop it into this table. And so now I've got a default color. And if my customer says, oh my God, what is that blue color you're using? I want mine to be pink. I say, oh, no problem. And I go in and I change that color from that god-awful blue to a god-awful pink. And now my customer's happy. So it's just data, default data, indexes where defaults work. And in cases where, this is specific to this customer and this customer over here has completely different data in there, I'm not going to have any default data in the table out in the library. The table, the structure of the table is going to be there. And so I'll pull the structure in.
John, I don't know if this is what Kent was after, but I'm curious to know if you've got one of these, like your security add-in loaded, and it's got code in there that, as you say, it's running in the context of the main application database that you've got using this.
Right.
But you've got a table in your add-in with the same name as the table in your front end. How does your code differentiate between the front end table and the table with the same name in the add-in?
Because when you open a record set, part of what you open is what container. If there's a pointer to the container. ADO says, hey, go look in container XYZ in this location on the server and pull out something.
So you're using an in clause in the from clause.
Essentially, yes. I actually have I do all this stuff, I believe. I have to apologize, but we're talking 2004 stuff here, So I was using ADO, if I'm not mistaken. And ADO has these pointer strings that say this string points to my C2DB framework .mda or MDA, I think back in those days, in this location on this server. And so that allows me to go out to that specific place and pull information out of that specific container. Well, that's not the same as the front end. That path is not the same as the front end. The path of the front end is
does that help you understand what you were asking about, Kent?
Yeah.
A little bit, but so the library needs to know the path to the AccessDB that holds the table, so that it can use that path in the in clause or to create the connection.
Yep.
And that path can either be to the front end application or it can be to a back end database.
Right. But would you ever use the tables in the library for any purpose other than creating your initial?
No.
So it's a one-time usage for each new front end.
That's correct. What I do is I load the table structure.
Thank you.
With all the indexes and all that stuff, and I load any data that happens to be out there in. So this stuff, the developer and email is out there. Well, I go look, I go, well, pull in the data, pull in the structure, and one of the things that you can say is with or without the data, and you say with the data, and boom, it creates the whole thing inside your database with any data that happens to be out there.
And from then on, you're only working against this local table.
That's correct. You're only working against the local table. And you want that to happen because even C2DB framework, never mind the security part, even the framework can be working in 5 different database front ends inside the same company, right? And this group over here, in fact, somebody high up in the company may go, hey, I want the background color of all the forms in accounting to be pink. And I want the background color of all the forms in engineering to be green. Why? Because if I see a pink form in engineering, somebody's head is going to roll. Right? So if I walk in an area and I see a pink, it better be in accounting. If they're not accounting and they're in a pink form, somebody's head is going to roll because they're looking at accounting and they're not supposed to be looking at accounting.
Okay.
So you've got 5 different frameworks. You might have 5 different front ends. I'm not saying you necessarily do, but you might have.
Okay.
And that's kind of the point of any framework, is to allow you to say, hey, I've got this code that allows me to set the background color of forms. And hey, boss, what do you want the background color of this FE's forms to be? Green? No problem. This one pink? No problem. This one light blue? No problem. And you just go in, you pull the default into the framework, and then you pull that into the front end, that table into the front end, if it has to be specific to the front end. And now I load the data out of the library into the front end, and then I can overwrite that with new values specific to this front end or specific to that front end over there.
Yeah. So that was my next question. So there you have defaults in the library, which are then overwritten for the specific front end where it's going to run.
Yes.
And that's table.
It may or may not be.
Well, but you can.
May or may not be.
But that's stored in one of your system tables. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Now I'm
because if I go back over here and I look, if I go in here and I look, I could have So now I've just created a brand new system variable that says I've got a variable called JIT forms. If it's true, I'm going to default to using JIT subforms on my tabs, which means if a tab does not have the focus, I will not load the subform that's on that tab. If it's false, it's not JIT. So when that main form loads, it's going to load all the subforms on all the tabs. And if those subforms, F subforms, and yeah, 25 minutes later, we're going to have something loaded. So I could also have something called back color, text, or focus back color. VB cyan. So now when I load this table in out of the library, all of this stuff gets yanked in and put in the front end. And now I'm developing the front end, and somebody says, I don't like that cyan color, let's make it green. I go, okay, no problem. And I go in here and I say VB green. And I give it to them and they go, oh my God, well, I don't want VB green. Let's try yellow, and you do all this kind of crap, but that's how you do it.
Okay. And so your classes are referring to these sysvar tables for that.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So it's loading these records into a collection in CLS sysvar.
Yes. And I call it a cache. I take each one of these records is one sysvar class instance. And the sysvar class instance. Yes.
All right. So you can't show us the code that actually does load these records into the collection.
You can't trust it?
No. Can we see the code that loads these records into the collection?
Oh, can you see that code? Probably.
Well,
it's one of the main reasons I'm here. So
yeah, we're closing down on an hour and a half. So let's make a decision about how much longer you want to keep going.
You think we're running short? You think we're running short before the end of the session, George?
I'm just giving you a heads up.
Allocated hour.
Yeah. I think I'm finally understanding, so I'm happy, but
I want to see
how
what Kent asked.
If we want to, maybe we could take a quick look at the code while we're here.
Okay, let me go back over to here. And in here, VB sysvars, class sysvar. So this is one sysvar. It's got a name, a value, a memo, allow user edits, and allow override. Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Name, value, memo, user edits, allow overrides. Okay, so the class has a private variable for each one of these fields, right? So
yeah,
you know what's going to happen is I'm going to record set up in class sysvars. I'm going to open a record set and say, okay, we're going to open this specific table, sysvars table, and I can have one or I can have 20 sysvars tables. So I open some sysvars table, and I start at the beginning, and I load the first record, and I store it in a collection. And I move to the next one, I move to the next one, and I move to the next one. And when I'm done, every single record, every one of these records.
So you've got some code down further that does that?
That's in sysvars. That's in this thing. Okay. Yeah. Now, understand all this stuff. Basically, merge sysvars allows you to say, go get an Accdb connection and pull a particular table name and merge. If it's a new value, put the new value in there, et cetera, et cetera. So I've got all these functions that allow me to refresh sysvars. If somebody modifies a sysvar, I need to be able to refresh the sysvars and so forth. I mean, it's just opening record, reading each one in, creating one instance of sysvar for every record in a given sysvars table. And this thing says, okay, well, what's the connection? Where does the table exist out there in the world? And what's the name of the table that I'm going to put into this specific instance of sysvars? If you guys do classes, you know, I can have 5 of these sysvars tables. Each sysvar table has its own instance of class sysvars, and it will load however many instances of class sysvar as it needs to load all of the records. In this case, I've got 4 records, but I could have 20, I could have 100. And when you're done doing that, you now have a cache sitting in memory. You no longer have to go across the network. I started doing this kind of stuff because back in 2004, my users would all be pounding on one back end, and it was going out to the back end and opening the table and reading it and closing the table and doing all that stuff. I go, no. You know, let's cache it into class instances of class instances in collections. And now I can just ask for, hey, give me.
So you had a method there that you pass the table name and the connection string. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
It looks like, yeah, you're passing connection string, and it's doing getting the data and loading it.
It's getting the data and loading it into the table.
So where were we? Then you had
and so now this stuff, class sysvars, remember usys. No, I've got a usys. I've got a class framework right here. A class framework says, hey, I know about sysvars. I'm going to allow you to load as many sysvars as you want to load. I'm going to put that in a sysvars collection, and now you can call this class, a pointer to this class, and say, hey, I need data out of this sysvar table. So let's call it company info, and give me the sysvars class for company info, and then I can go to that class and say, hey, give me the president's name, and back pops the president's name, and it's all cached, just sitting in memory, because I loaded all that stuff just like Windows does. When it starts loading up, it's loading that stuff. It's got all the sysvars loaded. It's got, if it's using the security framework, it's got all that stuff loaded. Before you ever even form pop up, all that stuff behind the scenes has been loaded and put into memory and cached, and you can just call pointers to things. Call a pointer to the framework. The framework says, hey, I'm one thing. I am the framework here. Call me if you want to know about sysvar tables.
Did you ever do that on a just-in-time basis, John?
Oh, yes. Talking about just-in-time subforms?
No.
Oh, yes. Remember? I'm sorry.
No, I'm not.
Oh, did I ever do the loading on the just-in-time?
So
no.
Do you have your sysvars on a just-in-time basis?
No, I never did that. Pretty much, a user comes in and sits down and loads up the database. And getting at the sysvars table is a one-time thing. It takes, how long it takes, but typically it'll be a half a second or a quarter of a second or something to load all that sysvar information into the tables. You know, so, but if you're going to do that same exact thing repeatedly over and over and over and over again for 40 different users loading 50 different forms, all of a sudden that overhead of pinging the server becomes enormous. So I just always did it as the form opens. The very first thing I did was call init framework, a function, init framework, and that called this, instantiated this thing right here, this class framework, and it said, well, I know about all these different functionalities.
But when you initialized that class in the first place, Tom points out that you actually passed it the code project.connection. So when you initialize the class, the library class, you actually passed it the ADA connection, which is how you know where to find the data.
Yeah, that's correct. But this stuff executes out of the front end. Any code executing is executing out of the front end, right? So if I set up my front end and say, load the framework, and I hand user A a front end, and in fact, this is what I did, actually. They would click a batch file at the beginning of the day, and it would download the front end and the frameworks into a directory on their hard drive, so that everything was local to their machine. Only the data, only the information for, an insurance policy or something like that.
Access app,
Yeah. So I would just click a batch file. It would download the FE and the frameworks, and I, as the developer, would say, this front end knows that its tables are out in this location out on the server. And as it loaded, it would say, okay, I'm going to go grab that data out of this location on the server and pull it into this table on this front end on this user's machine. And when it was done, that data had been cached on that user's machine, was sitting physically in memory. All of these classes, as they load, they don't unload until you tell them to unload. So sitting in there.
And therein lies a bit of an issue that I've had with trying to use external libraries, is that when you close the application, the libraries seem to hang, and Access hangs. There's no application open, but Access just hangs. And
that's because you're not completely cleaning up behind yourself. That happens.
I think that's what's going on, yes.
Well, actually, I'm not 100% convinced, but I don't know enough to be sure. I've been using what I call a library AccessDB for 8-10 years. It's not as sophisticated as this, but I've never had it hang like that, Kent.
Yeah, but
well, I used to have it hang. And I got to the point where you see all these sets. Well, there's a class term somewhere down here, or a function term that I would go into every once in a while and go, "Up, I've got that thing. Is it being set to nothing? Is that thing being set to nothing?" Et cetera, because the class terminate is going to run, and if it sets these things to nothing, then anything in this collection is going to start unloading the collection, and those things have their own terms, and et cetera, and it just ripples down.
Okay.
But you gotta do that cleanup, or you'll have problems.
Okay. So Tom asked another question. How often, when do you refresh the cache? Just once when you start, or during a session?
Typically, I'm a developer. So I'm sitting over in a room, scratching my head, figuring out new stuff. I go, okay, I've got a new form and a new piece of code over here in this thing, and I will put it out. And if it's really, really important, if it's a bug fix or something that just has to be done, we'll send out a message saying, everybody get out of the database and click your batch file again. And in the meantime, I put the changes out where they're going to get them, and they click the batch file and they get them. You know, all of that stuff has to do with you and how rigorous your process is for that kind of thing. You know, do you have code reviews? Do you have 6 people in a room look at all your code and you can't do anything until they all say yes? You know, I mean,
Do you ever have
or
a
are you
need,
all by yourself?
but do you ever have a need to do it just within a session? One user needs to refresh their cache independently of a system process. Is that
Only if they're testing something, typically. You know, I might have a particular user that is testing a new section of the database and nobody else is using that, you know, so only that particular user needs to refresh his thing because, you know, the stuff that he's testing, only he's testing. So typically, no.
John, this is Tom. I think George didn't quite paraphrase my question correctly. I was not talking about refreshing a library database or so. I was talking about the cache that you have described, where you're loading your data into a collection,
Into the cache.
essentially a collection. And if the underlying data changes in the database, the cache would have to be refreshed. So the question becomes, how are you becoming aware of the fact that some user changed some system data, some pseudo-static data that now has to be refreshed, and every user needs to refresh their cache?
Well, Access is not very multi-programmer friendly environment to be, or at least I didn't find it to be. So if I have let's say that I have a user that does security, and their job is to, when a new user comes on board, they have to get set up there and this, all that stuff, you know, then that user has to go into the database, the lightweight security database, and add him to the user data and add his, but if he belongs to this group and you just set him up to be using that group, then pretty much as soon as he loads his database, he's now part of the group that can open this form. So it's kind of hard. The users in general are not making changes to that kind of data. In general, the users are making changes to the client's social security number, the client's phone number, that kind of stuff. And that's not in these USIS tables. The USIS tables are things like, are we going to use just-in-time subforms? Well, if we make a change to that in the middle of the day, we're going to go from no, we're not to yes, we are. Then whoever decided that we're going to change that has to tell me we're going to change that one variable, and we're going to put out an email saying everybody get out of the database and reload. And I will make the change out there in the back end that says now we're using just-in-time subforms. And when they get out and reload, now suddenly they've got just-in-time subforms. Does that answer your question?
It does. There are other ways, but it's getting late, so let's move on. Thank you.
Well, just as in Windows, trying to get down to specifics of how something works, there's a lot of code here, a lot of ideas, a lot of things that I did 20 years ago. I can tell you the high level sysvars, you know, and stuff like that, but exactly the nitty gritty of exactly how this stuff is done, I don't even remember. And I'm not ever going to remember because nobody's ever going to use this stuff again. The concepts are what are important. concepts of caching all this stuff.
Yeah,
the concepts of loading a framework and having it do this, cache this, cache this. Okay, now who are you and what group do you belong to?
Yeah. Along those lines, is there anything out of your library database that you can share? Make available as an AccDB for this group in some format. Crystal wants a copy if you can.
Crystal may have a copy. Anybody may have a copy.
Oh, thank
Anybody
you.
can.
All right.
Anybody can have a copy of this stuff.
So if you can give that to me, I will well, actually, do you want it, how widely do you want it available? I mean, I can put it on our website as a download, or I can just make it available to folks here.
I think we should restrict it to the people that actually attend the sessions.
Okay. So.
Yeah.
Right.
What you're going to find, I think, is that when I was doing all this stuff, I would literally, you saw me stepping through. I would load a form, that would load class form, that would load, the scanner, that would load all this. And man, after about 6 levels in, unless you have a lot of patience and a real need to learn that stuff, you're going to be scratching your head going, what the heck was this guy doing? And that'll be a valid question, because what I did and the ideas of why I did this stuff may or may not even apply to you,
Yeah. But as you say, the concepts can be extrapolated from it. So.
Yeah. Loading the base tables out of the library into the front end, that's something that I would have thought most of us had done before. Loading the data out of a table out in the library and allowing a user to open a form that looks at the uses table and go, oh, I want to change just-in-time subform record. Click on that and change that from false to true, close it. And now anytime the next user opens that front end, they've got just-in-time subforms. You might not use just-in subforms, but the concept of doing that is not particularly high powered. I mean,
Yeah, I think that's what we're looking for, just some path to follow to kind of work out how to make it.
So to me, it seems that in developing something like this, you start off with the classes within the one application, AccDB. You get it all to work, because once you've put the code into an external library, you can't debug while you're running through it. So
that's true.
So you mostly get it done all in that AccDB. Then you export and change those flags in the classes into the library. You reference the library. And then if you come across a problem, you've got to go and modify the library and reload it. That's correct. Kind of the process in putting it all together. Now, for me, the big stumbling block is how does some code differ in the way it works when it's running inside the application to when it's inside in the library? And that's what we're kind of getting at with the way we access record sets. So
well, what you have
process in
what you have to remember is that any access container is just exactly the same as any other access container. So a library is nothing special. A library is just a container that used to say MDA. Turns out MDA didn't even mean anything,
Except that it can't directly access a linked table, and it can't be, the code in it can't be modified at runtime.
Well, yes, but so the way that I actually developed all this stuff is I went to work for this company up in Connecticut and sat down and started writing code, and my users were going, I can't find the damn insertion pointer. Where's the insertion pointer? You got the complicated form. Where's the insertion pointer? And I go, how can I fix that problem? And I did it in the front end. And I got a class for a text box that would sync all these events for text boxes. And when it got the insertion, and I did it right in the front end, and I got it working right in the front end. And when I was happy with it, I exported it to a text file, changed those two things, and dumped it into my library. And now it's available in my library. I told my clients, anything that is any code that's specific to your business belongs to you. Any code that I can use in the next business down the line belongs to me. Even if you pay me to develop it, it belongs to me. So everything that you see in the libraries is code that can be used in the next business down the line. There should be nothing in here that has anything whatsoever to do with insurance policies, as an example. And it had anything to do with insurance policies, it stayed in their front end and they owned it. And that was the contract that I had with them. But I actually developed it in the front end. So because I had to debug it, and you can't do that. Your users using the code, and you're making a change and going, try this. Oh, yeah, so, well, that caused, yeah.
So it all worked while it was in that one front end, but then when you exported it, I'm sure you found little things that just didn't work quite the same when it was
did, of course.
Library.
Yeah, or I wanted to add functionality to it. Oh, also have it do this. Like I double clicks in combo boxes, right? I had my users would say, hey, somebody's entering data in this table behind this combo box, and they're getting trash in there. So I said, okay, well, people in this group, and that's where the whole security thing, people in this group can double click in a combo box, and it'll say, the combo box will go, what table is being loaded into this combo box? And it would open a form for that table, and it would say, what specific record does this combo box point to right now? And when it opened that form, it would tell the form as it opened, hey, find this primary key and move to that thing. So they would select a record where somebody misspelled pink, P-I-N-N-K. They'd select that record, they'd double click it. Not everybody, only the people who were allowed to edit that data could double click it, and a little form would pop up with that table, and it would move to P-I-N-N-K, and that person would take one of the ends, close it. When it comes back into that combo box, the combo box would go, oh, I just got control again, requery the combo box, and boom, the combo box is now showing P-I-N-K instead of P-I-N-N-K. So I started with just change the background color, and one day somebody said, we got to be able to get in these tables and fix problems. And I said, oh, how am I going to attack that problem? And so I did.
Well, this is one of the things when you're moving from Access to SQL Server. Access is very good at refreshing data that has changed in other forms or by other people. SQL Server, not so much.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And not saying that it can't be done, but you're going to be jumping through hoops to do the same thing.
Oh, yeah, you got to write code to force refreshes, yeah.
Yeah, SQL Server basically opens a connection, grabs the data, closes the connection, and says, okay, what do you want to do with it? It enforces, hey, somebody else already changed the data over here, and it comes back and tells you, your data's dirty now. We're not going to store that data because somebody else changed it already. So you get to pull the data in again, open it, load the data, close the connection, and now, is it what you want? Not. Now you can edit it all over again on top of that other user's edits. It can be a mess. SQL Server is, but the nice part of that is that also allows you to open connections to SQL Server over the internet, and I did that. I had a SQL Server database running in my house, and I was out in town with a with a laptop talking to the SQL server on a server in my office over the internet, never corrupted data, because it opens the connection, grabs a record, closes the connection again, nothing to be corrupted.
So
works like a champ.
I'm looking at my clock up here on the wall that tells me we're close to 2 hours.
Yeah, and I got to drive.
How much stamina does everyone have? I'm looking ahead at my weekend editing this thing and getting it up on YouTube. But don't let that influence you. If you have other questions, discussions, please continue. I just want to let you know we're at a point where we can consider moving on if you'd like. I do want to make one quick teaser for next month's presentation. When we get there, is this a good time to do that? And then we can go back to maybe an offline discussion from here. How do you feel?
Sounds good to me, George.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you, John. I think this is your best presentation yet.
Yeah.
You really, really cleared up a lot of things, and I look forward to studying what you have done further. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a thought about that, which I'll come back to in a second. I'm going to do my preview for our next presentation. Kevin Bell dropped off early, but I asked him to do a presentation on a tool that he did this presentation for Armenstein's Access Day, and I really was impressed, and I asked him to do that for our group. It's a tool for working with databases. I think I'm going to misstate what it does, so I will say in a very general way. If you use SSMS to manage your SQL Server databases, you have the relational diagram, all the capabilities. dbeaver is the name of it. It does a lot of those same things, but it looks to me like it's much more user-friendly and flexible. So I asked him to show it to you, and he will do that at our next presentation. So my other thought is we have this Discord server. This conversation can go on for days. How would you feel about taking it to Discord as an ongoing discussion? Adrian, Tom, you guys are on there. Crystal?
I'm not sure I understand your question, George.
We can use the Discord channel as a place to carry on a conversation on this topic. We meet Tuesdays and Fridays now at an event.
Do you don't think 2 hours is enough to exhaust this topic?
Well, that's why I'm throwing it out there. What do you think?
Just a thought.
Well, I'm all for, trying to boost the Discord server, because frankly, it's a bit anemic. So if there is something that can revive that, or push it a little bit more, or get some other people involved in it, because I was close to uninstalling that software because there was just really nothing going on.
I think, if I understand you correctly, Tom, that I agree on the basis that yes, to encourage, if anyone has any questions or wants to take anything further, not limited to this topic, but any topic, knowing that there is a place where people are often, they may not be online all the time, but there are people that visit regularly and will catch messages that other people leave, and can also, if they happen to be online at the same time, they can chat and discuss things in more detail. In that respect, yes, I think it's a great idea. I have had numerous occasions where I have been online, someone else has been online, and they wanted to discuss something with me and just go through, and it haven't always been able to be greatly helpful. Have I, Tom? But anyway, but at least there was an opportunity. There's often an opportunity to discuss in detail, in person, video, what's his name, and go through ideas together. And I've done that with not just you, Tom, you obviously, but also others as well. And it does hold great benefit, I believe. So, you know, and it's true for any of these meetings. If you have something that and you want to take it further, then that would be a good place to continue it, get into more detail, whatever.
Yeah. I was thinking more in terms of the ability to look at some examples, as Crystal had asked, you know, can we look at the code? Maybe a chance to focus on one aspect of it.
Yeah.
And see where it goes. You know, I'm then, you know, I don't know who we talk to about getting a regular meeting, or just say, if you have a question, invite people to join you there.
Well, you know, Jim already has a couple meetings set up, one on Friday and one on Tuesday.
Correct.
And, you know, like on Friday, the last time, me and Adrian were the only ones there. So, you know, we talked about what we wanted to.
Yeah, there were 3 of us this Tuesday. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I mean,
sometimes there's not a lot to talk about, but I was thinking if people want to follow up on some aspect of this or anything else related, you know, that's a place where you don't have to wait for a scheduled meeting.
Indeed, the two, you call them meetings in Discord terminology, they're events, but they use a channel which is on the server, and anyone, literally anyone, or anyone who's on the server can get into that channel, and if more than one person's in that channel, they can talk to each other at any time, day or night, you know. So yes, these events are scheduled, but there's nothing to stop anyone from either sending messages to each other, but more than that, you can chat, you can have a meeting, you can do all sorts of things.
Or as Adrian found out, if I happen to leave my microphone on when I'm listening to movies on Netflix and Discord is open, you get to watch what I watch.
Luckily enough, Adrian's a moderator, so I was able to move you to inactive.
Yeah, that was an interesting day. So Crystal put the invite for the Discord channel in chat. If you're interested, you can click there and just join.
And interestingly, described it as a perma invite, which it is. So in other words, because often with Discord servers, you get an invite or an invitation, I should say. Everyone uses invite. It's a verb, you know. An invitation, which normally they expire after a short time, but this one has been set so it doesn't expire, because we want everyone interested in access to have that connection.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also, thank you, George and Adrian. I also just put one more link in the chat.
Oh, there,
for the YouTube video, because I think Jim and Doug just did a really, really awesome job with the basics and how it works.
Okay.
Yeah, they explained it. It was good.
All right. Good. So can we circle back around to John and wrap up, and then I'll just stop the recording. Do you have any more?
I'm done.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording then.